Continuing Caius Gracchus from Plutarch's Lives, translated by John Dryden, revised by Arthur Hugh Clough. When the commonalty ratified this law and gave him power to select those of the knights whom he approved of to be judges, he was invested with the sort of kingly power, and the Senate itself submitted to receive his advice in matters of difficulty, nor did he advise anything that might derogate from the honor of that body, as for example his resolution about the grain which Fabius the Propraetor sent from Spain was very just and honorable, for he persuaded the Senate to sell the grain and return the money to the same provinces which had furnished them with it, and also that Fabius should be censured for rendering the Roman government odious and insupportable. The furnishing them with the corn. I say grain because that's what they mean, and they don't mean what we typically mean when we say corn. So, this got him extraordinary respect and favor among the provinces. Besides all this, he proposed measures for the colonization of several cities, for making roads, and for building public granaries, of all which works he himself undertook the management and superintendence, and was never wanting to give necessary orders for the dispatch of all these different and great undertakings, and that with such wonderful expedition and diligence as if he had been but engaged upon one of them, insomuch that all persons, even those who hated or feared him, stood amazed to see what a capacity he had for effecting and completing all he undertook. As for the people themselves, they were transported on the very sight when they saw him surrounded with a crowd of contractors, artificers, public deputies, military officers, soldiers, and scholars. All these he entreated with an easy familiarity, yet without abandoning his dignity in his gentleness, and so accommodated his nature to the wants and occasions of every one who addressed him, that those were looked upon as no better than envious detractors, who had represented him as a terrible, assuming, and violent character. He was even a greater master of the popular leader's art in his common talk and his actions than he was in his public addresses. His most especial exertions were given to constructing the roads, which he was careful to make beautiful and pleasant, as well as inconvenient. They were drawn by his directions through the fields, exactly into a straight line, partly paved with hewn stone, and partly laid with solid masses of gravel. When he met with any valleys or deep watercourses crossing the line, he either caused them to be filled up with rubbish, or bridges to be built over them, so well leveled, that all being of an equal height on both sides, the work was presented one uniform and beautiful prospect. Besides this, he caused the roads to be all divided into miles, each mile containing little less than 8 furlongs, and erected pillars of stone to signify the distance from one place to another. He likewise placed other stones at small distances from one another on both sides of the way, by help of which travelers might get easily on horseback without wanting a groom. For these reasons, the people highly extolled him, and were ready upon all occasions to express their affection towards him. One day, in an oration to them, he declared that he had only one favor to request, which if they granted, he should think the greatest obligation in the world, yet if it were denied, he would never blame them for the refusal. This expression made the world believe that his ambition was to be consul, and it was generally expected that he wished to be both consul and tribune at the same time. When the day for election of consuls was at hand, and all in great expectation, he appeared in the field with Caius Fannius, canvassing together with his friends for his election. This was of great effect in Fannius's favor. He was chosen consul, and Caius elected tribune a second time, without his own seeking or petitioning for it, but at the voluntary motion of the people. When he understood that the senators were his declared enemies, and that Fannius himself was none of the most zealous of friends, he began again to rouse the people with other new laws. He proposed that a colony of Roman citizens might be sent to repeople Tarentum, and Capua, and that the Latins should enjoy the same privileges with the citizens of Rome. But the Senate, apprehending that he would, at last, grow too powerful and dangerous, took a new and unusual course to alienate the people's affections from him, by playing the demagogue in opposition to him, and offering favors contrary to all good policy. Livius Drusus was fellow tribune with Caius, a person of as good a family as the well-educated as any amongst the Romans, and no ways inferior to those who for their eloquence and riches were the most honored and most powerful men of that time. To him, therefore, the chief senators made their application, exhorting him to attack Caius and join in their confederacy against him, which they designed to carry on, not by using any force or opposing the common people, but by gratifying and obliging them with such unreasonable things as otherwise they would have felt it honorable for them to incur the greatest unpopularity in resisting. Livius offered to serve the Senate with his authority in this business, and proceeded accordingly to bring forward such laws as were in reality neither honorable nor advantageous for the public, his whole design being to outdo Caius in pleasing and cajoling the populace, as if it had been in some comedy, with obsequious flattery and every kind of gratifications, the Senate thus letting it be seen plainly that they were not angry with Caius's public measures, but only desirous to ruin him utterly, or at least to lessen his reputation. For when Caius proposed the settlement of only 2 colonies, and mentioned the better class of citizens for that purpose, they accused him of abusing the people, and yet, on the contrary, were pleased with Drusus, when he proposed the sending out of 12 colonies, each to consist of 3,000 persons, and those 2 the most needy that he could find. When Caius divided the public land amongst the poor citizens, and charged them with a small rent annually to be paid into the exchequer, they were angry at him as one who sought to gratify the people only for his own interest, yet afterwards they commended Livius, though he exempted them from paying even that little acknowledgment. They were displeased with Caius for offering the Latins an equal right with the Romans of voting at the election of magistrates, but when Livius proposed that it might not be lawful for a Roman captain to scourge a Latin soldier, they promoted the passing of that law. And Livius, in all his speeches to the people, always told them that he proposed no laws but such as were agreeable to the Senate, who had a particular regard to the people's advantage. And this truly was the only point in all his proceedings which was of any real service, for it created more kindly feelings toward the principal senators. More kindly feelings towards the Senate and the people, and whereas they formerly suspected and hated the principal senators, Livius appeased and mitigated this perverseness and animosity by his profession that he had done nothing in favor and for the benefit of the commons without their advice and approbation. But the greatest credit with which Drusus got for kindness and justice towards the people was that he never seemed to propose any law for his own sake or his own advantage. He committed the charge of seeing the colonies rightly settled to other commissioners. Neither did he ever concern himself with the distribution of the moneys, whereas Caius always took the principal part in any important transactions of this kind. Vibrius, another tribune of the people, had proposed to have Carthage again inhabited, which had been demolished by Scipio, and it fell to Caius's lot to see this performed. And for that purpose he sailed to Africa. Drusus took this opportunity of his absence to insinuate himself still more into the people's affections, which he did chiefly by accusing Fulvius, who was a particular friend to Caius, and was appointed commissioner with him for the division of the lands. Now, of course, one thing we definitely have here, the F and the V should always indicate you that we're not dealing with a Greek name, although there are some Greek words with the letter F in it, but they're pretty rare. Fulvius was a man of turbulent spirit and notoriously hated by the Senate, and besides, he was suspected by others to have fomented the difference between the citizens and their confederates. And also, they don't have a Q. They have a K, but they don't have a Q. And underhand to be inciting the Italians to rebel, though there was little other evidence of the truth of these accusations than his being an unsettled character and of a well-known seditious temper. This was one principal cause of Caius's ruin, for part of the envy which fell upon Fulvius extended to him. And when Scipio Africanus died suddenly, and no cause of such an unexpected death could be assigned, only some marks of blows upon his body seemed to intimate that he had suffered violence, as is related in the history of his life. The greatest part of the odium attached to Fulvius, because he was his enemy, and that every day had reflected upon Scipio in a public address to the people. Nor was Caius himself clear from suspicion. However, this great outrage committed too upon the person of the greatest and most considerable man in Rome was never either punished or inquired into thoroughly, for the populace opposed and hindered any judicial investigation, for fear that Caius should be implicated in the charge if proceedings were carried on. This, however, had happened some time before. But in Africa, where at present Caius was engaged in the repeopling of Carthage, which he named Janania, many ominous appearances, which presaged mischief, are reported to have been sent from what they consider to be gods and goddesses. Well, something occurs, it doesn't mean it's, what the people are worshiping that sent it, but, they would obviously attribute this type of thing to this sort of entity, and another sort of thing to another sort of entity, and so on. For a sudden gust of wind falling upon the first standard, and the standard mirror, holding it fast, the staff broke. Another sudden storm blew away the sacrifices which were laid upon the altars, and carried them beyond the bounds leaked out for the city, and the wolves came and carried away the very marks that were set up to show the boundary. Caius, notwithstanding all this, ordered and dispatched the whole business in the space of 70 days, and then returned to Rome, understanding how Fulvius was prosecuted by Drusus, and that of the present juncture affairs would not suffer him to be absent, for Lucius Opimius, one who sided with the nobility and was of no small authority in the Senate, who had formerly sued the consul and was repulsed by Caius's interest at the time when Fannius was elected, was in a fair way now of being chosen consul, having a numerous company of supporters, and it was generally believed that if he did obtain it, that he would wholly ruin Caius, whose power was already in a declining condition, and the people were not so apt to admire his actions as formerly, because there were so many others who every day contrived new ways to please them, with which the Senate readily complied. After his return to Rome, he quitted his house on the Palatine Mount, and went to live near the marketplace, endeavoring to make himself more popular in those parts, where most of the humble and poorer citizens lived. He then brought forward the remainder of his proposed laws, as intending to have them ratified by the popular vote, to support which a vast number of people collected from all quarters. But the Senate persuaded Fannius, the consul, to command all persons who were not born in Rome to depart the city. A new and unusual proclamation was thereupon made, prohibiting any of the allies or confederates to appear at Rome during that time. Caius, on the contrary, published an edict accusing the consul for what he had done, and setting forth to the confederates that if they would continue upon the place, they might be assured of his assistance and protection. However, he was not so good as his word, for though he saw one of his own familiar friends and companions dragged to prison by Fannius's officers, He, notwithstanding, passed by without assisting him, either because he was afraid to stand the test of his power, which had already decreased, or because, as he himself reported, he was unwilling to give his enemies an opportunity, which they very much desired, of coming to actual violence and fighting. About that time there happened likewise a difference between him and his fellow officers upon this occasion. A show of gladiators was to be exhibited before the people in the marketplace, and most of the magistrates erected scaffolds round about, with an intention of letting them for advantage. Caius commanded them to take down their scaffolds, that the poor people might see the sport without paying anything, but nobody obeying these orders of his, he gathered together a body of laborers who worked for him, and overthrew all the scaffolds the very night before the contest was to take place, so that by the next morning the marketplace was cleared, and the common people had an opportunity of seeing the pastime. In this the populace thought he had acted the part of a man, but he much disobliged the tribunes, his colleagues, who regarded it as a piece of violent and presumptuous interference. This was thought to be the chief reason that he failed of being the third time elected tribune. Not but that he had the most votes, but because his colleagues, out of revenge, caused false returns to be made. But as to the matter, there was a controversy. Certain it is, he very much resented the repulse, and behaved with unusual arrogance toward some of his adversaries, who were joyful at his defeat, telling them that all this was but a false and sardonic mirth, as they little knew how much his actions threw them into obscurity. As soon as Epimius also was chosen consul, they presently cancelled several of Caius's laws, and especially called in question his proceedings at Carthage, admitting nothing that was likely to irritate him, that from some effect of his passion they might find a tolerable pretence to put him to death. Caius at first bore these things very patiently, but afterwards, at the instigation of his friends, especially Fulvius, he resolved to put himself at the head of a body of supporters, to oppose the consul by force. They say also that on this occasion his mother, Cornelia, joined in the sedition, and assisted him by sending privately several strangers into Rome, under pretense as if they came to be hired there for harvestmen, for that intimations of this are given in her letters to him. However, it is confidently affirmed by others that Cornelia did not in the least approve of these actions. When the day came in which Epimius designed to abrogate the laws of Caius, both parties, not very early at that capital, and the consul having performed all the rites usual in their service, one Quintus Antullius so attended on the consul, carrying out the entrails to the victim, spoke to Fulvius and his friends who stood about him. Ye factitious citizens, make way for honest men. Some report that besides this provoking language, he extended his naked arm towards them as a piece of scorn and contempt. Upon this he was presently killed with the strong styles which are commonly used in writing, though some say that on this occasion they had been manufactured for this purpose only. This murder had caused a consternation in the whole assembly, and the heads of each faction had their different sentiments about it. Whereas Caius, he was much grieved and severely reprimanded his own party because they had given their adversaries a reasonable pretense to proceed against them, which they had so long hoped for. Epimeus, immediately seizing on the occasion thus offered, was in great delight. He urged the people to revenge, but there happening a great shower of rain, on a sudden, it put an end to the business of that day. Early the next morning the consul summoned the Senate, and whilst he advised with the senators in the Senate House, the corpse of Antelius was laid upon a bier and brought through the marketplace, there, exposed to open view, just before the Senate House, with a great deal of crying and lamentation. Epimeus was not at all ignorant that this was designed to be done. However, he seemed to be surprised and wondered what the meaning of it should be. And the senators, therefore, presently went out to know the occasion of it, and standing about the corpse, uttered exclamations against the inhuman and barbarous act. The people, meantime, could not but feel resentment and hatred for the senators, remembering how they themselves had not only assassinated Tiberius Gracchus as he was executing his office in the very capital, but had also thrown his mangled body into the river. Yet now they could honor with their presence and their public lamentations in the forum the corpse of an ordinary hired attendant, who, though he might perhaps die wrongfully, was, however, in a great measure, the occasion of it himself, by these means hoping to undermine him who was the only remaining defender and safeguard of the people. The senators, after some time, withdrew, and presently ordered that Epimeus, the consul, should be invested with extraordinary power to protect the commonwealth and suppress all tyrants. This being decreed, he presently commanded the senators to arm themselves, and the Roman knights to be in readiness with very early the next morning, and every one of them to be attended with 2 servants well armed. Fulvius, on the other side, made his preparations and collected the populace. Caius, at that time, returning from the marketplace, made a stop just before his father's statue, and fixing his eyes for some time upon it, remained in a deep contemplation. At length he sighed, shed tears, and departed. This made no small impression upon those who saw it, and they began to upbraid themselves that they should desert and betray so worthy a man as Caius. They therefore went directly to his house, remaining there as a guard about it all night, though in a different manner from those who were a guard to Fulvius, for they passed away the night with shouting and drinking, and Fulvius himself, being the first to get drunk, spoke and acted many things very unbecoming a man of his age and character. Well, hopefully you deal with that sort of thing before you hit puberty, but most people don't. On the other side, the party which guarded Caius were quiet and diligent, relieving one another by turns, and forecasting, as in a public calamity, what the issue of things might be. As soon as daylight appeared, they roused Fulvius, who had not yet slept off the effects of his drinking, and having armed themselves with the weapons hung up in his house that were formerly taken from the Gauls, whom he conquered in the time of his consulship, they presently, with threats and loud acclamations, made their way towards the Aventine Mount. Caius could not be persuaded to arm himself, but put on his gown as if he had been going to the assembly of the people, only with this difference, that under it he had then a short dagger by his side. As he was going out, his wife came running to him at the gate, holding him with one hand, and with the other a young child of his. She bespoke him, "Alas, Caius, I do not now part with you to let you address the people, either as a tribune or lawgiver, nor as if you were going to some honorable war, when you thought you might perhaps have encountered that fate which all must some time or other submit to. Yet you had left me this mitigation of my sorrow, that my mourning was respected and honored. You now go to expose your person to the murderers of Tiberius, unarmed indeed, and rightly so, choosing rather to suffer the worst of injuries than to do the least yourself. But even your very death at this time will not be serviceable to the public good. For faction prevails, power and arms are now the only measures of justice. Had your brother fallen before Numantia, the enemy would have given back what had remained of Tiberius. But such is my hard fate, that I publicly must be an humble suppliant to the floods or the waves, that would somewhat restore to me your relics. For since Tiberius was not spared, what trust can we place either on the laws or in the gods?" Lucinia, thus bewailing Caius by degrees, getting loose from her embrace, silently withdrew himself, being accompanied by his friends. She, endeavoring to catch him by the gown, fell prostrate upon the earth, lying there for some time speechless. His servants took her up for dead, and conveyed her to her brother Crassus. That's quite something. You got somebody who's like, even he throwing on his bathrobe, he has a weapon at his side. That's practically unarmed.